How about now? Can you hear me now? I think you probably hear me now. Are we good? Yeah, all right. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not the tech. I'm not the tech whiz. All right. Okay, so yeah, I'm happy to see everyone. I hope you're having a great summer. It's been an interesting month, as some of you might know, some of you might not know. The uh, the Odyssey is leaning large on our culture moment, and everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a perception, and the perception is very divided, and it's very interesting to see how divided it is. Of course, if you watch my video, I think you know why I think it's so divided. I think Christopher Nolan is a magician, and uh, and he's doing something with one hand and doing something with the other, and people only see one hand, they don't see the other, and therefore, depending on what your political opinion is, it's basically a kind of mirror for your political take. And so, because it's interesting, because I see people argue about it, and they'll say such a character said that, and often if you just play it a little longer, it turns into something else. And what is it? Someone that I respect, she what I forget who it was, said, that the speech there's a speech in the movie where Penelope kind of complains about her state as a woman and about the fact that she's been a regent basically for all this time, and that she knows what she's doing and Telemachus doesn't know. And the person said, this is annoying. It's suggesting that it's kind of a feminist take, but just if you wait just a few minutes, a few seconds, then she says, I want Odysseus, right? Basically saying, I want my husband to come back. And so, it's like that during the whole movie. And so it's been interesting to watch. It's been interesting to watch it go ahead. All right. And so, as you know, the way that this works is pay attention to the chat to some extent. Obviously, super chats pop up and I can do those. But for people who support the Symbolic World, you can ask questions in advance. And I try to go through all the questions that people ask in advance. And so, all right. And so people are saying that we're near 300,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel, and yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm pretty excited about that. I don't really know what it means, but I think it's great. I've been trying to be a little more active. If you've noticed on the channel, I've been focusing a lot on the Symbolic World Press in the past, year or so, and now realizing I also want to kind of put more attention on the channel. And so hopefully we're gonna have more videos, and also just be try to find good guests and stuff. So yeah, so good stuff. And so all right, here we go. All right, so Pierce Richardson. By the way, if you guys don't know who Pierce Richardson is, you should check him out. He is a bladesmith. He makes amazing swords. I was actually on the circle on the Symbolic World community, and he was posted a video of his most recent sword, and it's just really beautiful. So if you guys are interested, you should check it out. All right, so Pierce Richardson. Now that I've finally become a patron, I've gone back and watched all of the patron-only content. Given all of the work you've done and shared with the world, what do you hope is the one key takeaway or teaching that people remember from your work? And would you end it with, I hope that makes sense? um, if there's one takeaway that I want people to come out of with my work, is that, the world is full of meaning, that the world is a revelation. And, once you start to see it, then it fills you with the wonder of seeing. And so to me, that's, if people can come out with one thing, is that, because if you notice the way that not always, sometimes I don't necessarily have the right perspective, but most of the time what I try to do with people is just provoke that insight, is just to try to say things in a way and put things next to each other in a way that people will go, aha, right, and kind of see it. And that's really what I want people to take away. It's more not even mental understanding, but that sense of insight, right? That moment when things click together, and all of a sudden the world feels like it's more full of light and more full of meaning and purpose. Really, that's what I love. Um, All right. And so let's see. The comments are still in French, so I'll have to like retranslate them in English. I keep looking at how to change it, and for some reason I can't. I don't know how, because I'm also a boomer. I'm not a technical person at all. Um, Someone asked you, what do you think of the fact that Ulysses shows remorse rather in his return rather than being triumphant, but then still went. Oh, what if I highlight it? It's in English. But then still went on to kill the suitors. To make him remorseful makes it out of character for him to take vengeance, in my opinion. And really, this is important what you're asking, and it's really important to understand that that is not the case, and that there is a big difference in this is I mean this is such a confusion that people have. There's a very big difference between destroying someone else's city and policing your own home. You know, those are not the same. There's one that can bring about guilt if you are, obviously if you're killing people that are, doing that outside. But if you come home and you clean up your home, then that is a different case, right? And so policing your own state is not evil. It's not. But if you go out and you rampage and you rape and pillage someone else's city, then that is evil, at least from a Christian perspective. So I think that that's really what the story is also showing, is that you go out, you do these horrible things in a war. And for example, let's take America, right? So America has done evil things, let's say since World War II. If you think of a lot of the wars that they've done, many seem to be cynical, and many seem to be these forever wars that they engage in. But it doesn't mean that they have to let their country be destroyed by chaos within. They can police their own state, even though they can also recognize some of the sins of their past. So that's kind of the way that I see it. All right. Let's see here. So Doro asks, hi, Jonathan. How did the disappearance of Marian devotion affect Protestant cities and countries? Sometimes I think that the resurgence of witchcraft in America is a consequence of there being no strong positive image of a woman with influence on the world, like the Virgin Mary would be for us, praying at Cana, praying at Pentecost, crowned Queen of Heaven, and praying for us as the Queen Mother. I know many Protestant women take the women in the Bible as role models, but this is not the same as prayer and devotion, and it's certainly not the same scale of importance as Marian devotion are for Catholics. I just can't imagine that this shift would have any consequences for society. I'm going to probably surprise you here and say this, that I think that Protestant anti-marial devotion sometimes is also facing excessive marial devotion in Catholicism. And if you look at it in Orthodoxy, we don't have an image of Mary alone. It's very rare. Maybe you'll occasionally see something like that. But most of the time, when we show her, we also show her in reference to her son. So either she has the Christ child with her, or she is at the crucifixion. She's looking at Christ. And so this is the context. It's to kind of understand the feminine as the house of the seed, right? And we do believe in the theosis of the Mother of God, and you can kind of understand that in some ways all of this is showing the place of creation in relationship to the Creator. And so we also have to be cautious in our devotion, and also kind of understanding that this devotion is always through her towards Christ, and not see it as something that would make her into something equivalent to the Trinity or something like that. To me, that's I'm not saying that's what you're suggesting, Doro, by the way, but I find that, at least my perception is that there is obviously a dearth of vision in Protestantism in terms of the Mother of God, but I feel like because it ends up being like a kind of dialectic, there's almost an excess on the other side. At least that's my perception, and you have to remember, like when we say devotion, when all the devotion we have towards the saints is always a devotion that is leading us to Christ. Every time we pray to the Mother of God, we're asking her to pray for us. She doesn't have an independent existence. She doesn't have an existence that we can address, as a kind of closed off thing. We always have to understand that whatever requests we address to her, they are then prayed to God, right? She turns to her Son, and that is always the structure, right, of our interaction with her, because it's an image of our interaction with all of the mediated realities of the church, of the priests, of the bishops, of our friends that we ask to pray for us, of all the saints. She becomes like a kind of crystallized image of all of those beautiful relationships of intercession. But we always have to remember that they are intercession. So, yeah. Interesting question in the super chats. Jong, whatever, 4671 for 599 euros. What's the symbolic difference between attics and cellars? Both liminal spaces, but one's up and one's down. And so it makes sense. I mean, if you think of it, like, I might be wrong, but if you think of it just right away, the image that comes to you is that in general, I mean, obviously there's exceptions and everything, but you can kind of imagine that in general, you would imagine there's a ghost in the attic, right? And there's a monster in the cellar. At least that's the way that I would see it, is that it's easier to imagine a ghost in the attic and a kind of, some kind of thing chained to the wall, in the cellar. And so it's the difference, of course, between a kind of disconnected spirit, right, and you could say a excessive body at the bottom. But you're right that often, because they're both kind of liminal, and they're both are usually not living spaces, right? They are on the edges, that they can be similar in their symbolism. But that's a great question. All right, so Isaac A says, did you ever finish Attack on Titan? From a Girardian perspective, it seems to describe a world in which Christ's sacrifice never happened. Reciprocal scapegoating runs its natural course as the story progresses, despite a caricature Christ figure attempting self-sacrifice before being stopped by his own. It features explicit Nazi imagery, but it's Germanic Eldians who are held in concentration camps due to the imperialist sins of their ancestors, which they are continually reminded of. For those sins, they are hated by the world. Which acts as the basis for its unity. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. I'll be honest with you. Look, I watched some of it, and I watched several seasons, but man, these animes, they're just so long, and I don't have time. And so I kind of got bored, not bored, but just kind of checked out at some point and decided I didn't finish it. And I also felt like it was kind of going, at some point you feel like things are kind of going around in circles. You're not totally sure, if there's some really directed endpoint. So sadly, I didn't finish it. But I did think in general that the basic symbolic structure was interesting. But maybe one day I'll finish it, but I don't know when, because really, who has, I mean, I don't have that kind of time and energy, sadly. All right. Noah Joel D in the super chat says, what's the symbolism of peptides, especially weight loss drugs that remove hunger, changing our relationship with desire, discipline, and human nature? Yeah, for sure. This whole kind of Ozempic kind of thing, it's obviously, it's very dangerous. It's a kind of illusion of ascesis, this idea that you can just take chemicals in order to change your inner desires. To me, it's just, look, I'm not saying that sometimes you don't have to do that, but it's kind of dangerous. It's dangerous because it's external, right, to your will, and therefore the secret desire, or the thing that is actually fueling the desire. Let's say you have a problem with eating too much, right? So that's an unbalance in your soul. It's something that you should have to fight inside you in order to reestablish the proper order. Now, so if you take drugs in order to reduce that desire, then you are not dealing with the deepest aspect of the passion, right? You're able to kind of create some external pressure that will prevent you. And so, it's okay to have those kinds of external pressures. If you're tempted by something, you shouldn't put it in your face. It's the same thing. It's like if you can't fight all your sexual thoughts and sexual desires, then maybe you shouldn't go to the beach where there's all these girls in bikinis, right? So it's good to also work on the external aspect of your desires. So until you're able to fight your thoughts and your passions, then you should keep the external thing away from you. But the problem with the Ozempic is, it gives you the impression that the desire is gone. And so, I can't imagine that when people stop using that drug and these drugs, that they won't just immediately get fat again, because they haven't dealt with the reason why they were engaged in this excess in the first place. So, All right, so Ethan Moore says, hi, Jonathan. Is there a balance or link to be found between raising children with a magical imagination, i.e. setting up fairy houses, searching for magical creatures in the forest, or even something like Elf on a Shelf in Christianity? Does fostering a sense of magic in the world actually help a child appreciate the Christian story as they get older, or can it serve to confuse them? Thanks. I don't have a problem with the things you describe. I would say that it's really all about hierarchy of importance, and understand, if a child doesn't go to church, but you're doing this kind of stuff, then it might actually be harmful to them. But if you are going to church and then you can play these games, my sense is, the way that I did it with my children is I always kind of always kept it open, that it's a game, that it's something that we're playing. It's like that, because children know what it means to play make-believe. They do it all the time. And so I think that keeping a sense of make-believe in those types of gestures is, to me, a good way to find the right balance between the difference between the church, the life, the stories in the Bible, the lives of the saints, all of these kinds of stories, and then the fairy stories. So it doesn't mean you wouldn't make the fairy house and you wouldn't do that, but you always have to approach it in the same way that the children approach their make-believe stories. So that's my take on it. That's at least how I did it with my kids, and it seemed to go well, but I don't know. There are different So John Maximo says, please explain the meaning, symbolism of wine in the Old New Testament. Why do you think wine was banned by Muhammad and his followers? I have a theory on that, and this is really my theory, is that Islam is an aspect of Islam is in some ways an excess of straight, right? It's an excess of order, because it doesn't have it seems to lack the subtle capacity to understand the difficult stories in Scripture, and the stories that have that aspect of wine that kind of introduce ambiguity. And so for that reason, that's why they rectify everything, right? And the crucifixion is obviously the first thing that they need to rectify, because if you have a prophet, and if you have a holy man, then that holy man can't be crucified. It even says in Scripture that, what does it say? Something about how the just will not hang by a tree. And so the story of the crucifixion is very bothersome, because it is not straight. It's not a straight line. That's why you would make, for example, this story of the sacrifice of the son into the first son of Abraham rather than the second son, because that's how it is. Perfect lineage, perfect straight line. And so the symbolism of wine is intoxication. It's a fermentation, intoxication. It's death used against itself, right? It's an image of that world where death has a mystery to it, and so it's understandable why Muhammad would not want his people to drink, because everybody has to stay in a straight line, and everybody has to submit. That's what Islam is. Islam means submission. It means that your relationship with God is you down on your knees with your forehead to the ground. And there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, Christians also believe that that's an aspect of our relationship with God. But we also believe that there is a passionate element to our relationship with God, that there is a ecstatic element to our relationship with God. And there is we could almost use the word transgressive in the bright way, right? That in some ways this ecstatic relationship, it goes beyond simply God up here, you down there, get on your knees. And so this is why I think Islam doesn't have wine. And, if you look at Sufi traditions, you'll see that they try in some ways to reintegrate the wine, and reintegrate the mystical, and reintegrate, this more subtle aspect of the tradition. But, the Sufis are constantly persecuted by, traditional Islam, which is not the case in Orthodoxy. So, right, in Orthodoxy, ultimately the mystics end up being celebrated and become saints. So that's a difference, and at least that's my perception of the difference. All right, Ioannis Leonardos. Hello, Jonathan. I watched your video about the Odyssey being a Trojan horse that is trying to wrap a good message inside a subversive container to make people more receptive to it. I was wondering whether there's also a possibility that it is the opposite, wrapping a good story around a subversive message, or maybe even doing both to appeal to the broadest audience possible and make everyone get what they want. In any case, you convince me to go watch a movie. If I do so before the live stream, I may edit my comment. And so I think that your insight is right. The more I watch it, the more I think that, there's something of what you're saying in there, which is that you can get what you want from the Odyssey because it's kind of, like I said, Nolan is doing things with both hands. He's playing magic tricks on you. And he's saying something like, hey, if you're a left winger, pay attention to my left hand. And if you're a right winger, pay attention to my right hand. And then he kind of plays around. And I think it's really interesting what he's doing. But see, this is the thing, is that this is the secret, folks, is that we can also be tricky, and we can take it because everything's there. You can take it, make it yours, make it ours, because it's all there in the story. And I think that at this point, the difficulty is that a lot of the more right-wing people, they just oppose it. But this movie is going to make $1 billion, folks. So, make it yours. I don't know what to say. I feel like I'm ruining this whole thing by telling you guys. I'm not good at keeping secrets, folks. That's how it is. All right. So Reginald Desrosiers, for $49.99. Wow, thanks, man. Hey, Jonathan, you mentioned go to church as a way to return home to meaning. I plan to do this. Is there anything that can be done during the week in the meantime in order to help reconnect with meaning? Thanks for all you do. I mean, obviously, a simple thing you can do is to stay in a state of gratitude. That is, say a short prayer in the morning, do Our Father, pray before you eat. Just these little gestures to kind of maintain a spirit of gratitude. Gratitude is the way to know what it is, to be able to focus on what is good. And when you do that, then things realign towards meaning. And so I would say that that's just a little hint of something you can kind of do during the day to remind you, and then obviously in general, just, see the things you do as adventures, that you have all these possibilities of, instead of seeing the things you do as a slog, you try to kind of formulate them as these little adventures. And when you do that, then things kind of become brighter. I'm not the best at doing that. I know people that are much better. Like there's some people that I know that, for example, everywhere they go, they're always basically, and there's also an extrovert introvert thing, but I know some people that wherever they go, they're always kind of ready to make a friend. which is just, to me, it's a kind of astounding, but it's beautiful. And so they kind of go and walk around, and every interaction they have, whether it's the person at the grocery store, they treat them as a potential friend. Doesn't mean obviously they're going to become a friend, but there's a kind of warmness and a humanity, and then it lights people up. And so yeah. All right, so Robespierre for £5 says, "Hi Jonathan, I'd love to know your opinion on Robert Eggers' films. Your video have changed my world view completely, so thank you." I mean, Eggers is obviously a great director. His imagery is striking. His sense is, but they're really pagan movies. And pagan movies are better than atheist movies, let's be honest. So, but they really are pagan. And they still have something that really kind of catches you. So there's a darkness obviously in what he's doing. There's a kind of fetishization of the dark aspects of the world. But I mean, obviously a lot of his movies are horror movies anyways. So yeah, I've said that I haven't seen all of them, but all the ones that I've seen, I feel like they're successful for sure in terms of storytelling. But it's interesting because in the Dracula one, the Nosferatu one, he comes right up to it, right? He has this orthodoxy there, but he makes it kind of empty. It's too bad. It would have been interesting to integrate religious symbolism, because in the original Dracula story, Dracula doesn't like the sacraments, right? He really is bothered by the sacraments. And so I wish that would have been more in the story. All right, Blyberry says, "Hi, Jonathan. What patterns start to emerge when a person engages in narcissistic, empathic altruism? How can we recognize this behavior in our lives?" Yeah, man. It's not that hard to recognize. It's really about power. And so if you see that someone is using empathy to virtue signal, right? That's why we have that term, right? Virtue signaling is basically using empathy in order to give ourselves value. And so that's when you see it. When people use empathy to give themselves power or to make themselves look better, that's when you are dealing with kind of narcissistic altruism. And that's when you have to be really careful, And it's difficult because obviously this is something that's existed forever, right? People giving donations and having their name on a plaque or something, and so there's a limit case. And usually, and you always have to be careful to not criticize anyone who wants to be associated with generosity. But usually you can see, here's another one. This is actually probably the key, is that one, using empathy to gain power for oneself, and then using empathy to shame others. That's really the key. So if you have both of those, if you have someone who's using a kind of empathetic gesture to gain power, and then turns to you and looks at you and says, you are just not empathetic like I am. You're whatever. That's really, once you see that, then man, run away. Just run away from someone who does stuff like that. So Junius for 1999 says, "Speech in Capernaum equals Euripides' Bacchae. Eleusinian mysteries equals bread and wine. JP alludes to psychedelics in Christianity pretty frequently. This should be sparking Renaissance 2.0, but it's not even taken seriously by you. Why?" Well, I think there are reasons why. Christians don't engage in that, and I think that I think we're seeing it happening now, because That's one of the big things. If you watched enough of our videos, one of the big things that I disagree with Jordan about is his pushing for psychedelics, because psychedelics in the 1960s brought about part of our social collapse, and they're going to do it again. You know, because people are, first of all, because people are materialists, and they think that the pill is the thing. They think that they kind of attribute to themselves. And I see this, by the way, people who take, and people that I like, who take drugs, who take, ketamine or whatever, and then attribute to themselves the mystical experiences. It's like, talk about prelest. You've taken a chemical, dude. Like, you had that experience, but don't attribute it to yourself. Like, don't think that it makes you some kind of mystic. It doesn't make you anything. It just makes you a guy that took a bunch of drugs. And I think that that's the problem. You see it happen all the time. People who take psychedelics, who develop prelest, and they're kind of arrogant. So, and I've said I'm not against the fact that probably these chemicals have some uses, but the way it's happening now is clearly a problem. And the relationship between the psychedelics and AI and the tech bros is just not, it's not encouraging, because people, get their tech from their out of body experiences, but they have no discernment. They don't know, they just, that's why that's one of the problems, that the people who take the drugs and have actual experiences, but they attribute it to themselves, and they don't have the discernment to be able to know what it is they're encountering, all of that, so I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry, man. All right, let's see here. So Joel Kim asked me, hello, Jonathan, what is worship and what is its relation to glory? And so glory is this is my definition of glory, folks. And to me, if you have a better definition, you can tell me. But glory is the effect of something on other things, right? So it's basically the radiance of something. It's the way in which it externalizes itself. And so God's glory is his radiance in the world, right? It's his will and energies appearing in creation, right? Underneath creation, you could say. But all people have that, right? So like the glory of an emperor is all the battles that he won. It's the, it's all of the monuments that he built. It's all of the things that his inner person is now showing itself on the outside. And so obviously worship is to celebrate. Worship is to submit to, and to notice that something is higher than you, and then acknowledge it as higher. If you think of veneration rather than like adoration, let's say, this is what we do. We notice how something is above you. And usually what happens is that, if, especially like the idea of really adoring, say worshiping God in the highest sense, it is, we worship his glory as well. That is, we see his glory. We see how God is in the world and is acting on people around us and is manifesting himself. And the glory becomes like a ladder to be able to enter into the life of God. And so the glory is absolutely necessary. It's like the first thing that you see of God. And then, as you get closer, you enter into what, St. Gregory of Nyssa talks about, the divine darkness, right? Or the cloud of unknowing, which is, the source of the glory. So anyways, I hope that makes sense to you, and I hope it's useful. All right, so Colby Vlach for 1999 says, I've been curious to know your thoughts on Kierkegaard. There's a lot of stereotypes out there of him as some hyper-individualist, existentialist, but he's actually much more of a proto-phenomenologist, inspired Heidegger. I read Heidegger a very long time ago. I read Heidegger when I was like 18, 19. And so, I remember enjoying it at the time. I was a Protestant. To me, obviously, when you read Heidegger as a Protestant, it's like a breath of fresh air. you're kind of like, especially as like a, let's say a Baptist evangelical kind of low, very low church type of thing, you're like, oh my goodness, wow, like okay, this was giving me hope that there were really brilliant Protestants, really brilliant Christians, very thoughtful. But I don't know enough about Heidegger to probably say, you're probably right that there's a relationship between Heidegger and phenomenology, but I'm not versed well enough in Heidegger to be able to speak to it, honestly, sadly. So, oh, sorry, I kind of skipped a few things here. So Daniel Tibb says, please explain the symbolism of St. John's statement in 1 John 5:6-7 that Jesus came by water and blood, and the three that testify, spirit, water, and blood. Well, if obviously the spirit and the water, they're the two opposites of the beginning of creation. So you have the spirit above and the water below, and then if you think of the blood as a kind of, when in the Old Testament it says that the blood is the soul of the body, right? And so you can imagine that blood is an intermediary thing. So you can imagine of like blood coming down, right? If you think of how Christ is shown with the blood kind of coming down his body and then ultimately going down onto the skull of Adam or down onto the earth and kind of saving the earth. I think that that's really the way of understanding it, is that Christ is above, is the spirit, the water, and the blood that kind of flows down and connects the two opposites together. At least that's the way that I would tend to understand that. John Francis asks, what is the symbolism of the icon of the resurrection? I think it has something to do with theosis, that we are pulled up by Christ, and if we become transformed, we'll pull others up like a fractal mountain chain. Yes, that's a beautiful aspect of that symbolism, is that usually it's always shown that Christ is pulling up Adam and Eve into the kingdom. But we realize that in Adam and Eve is also all the others, right? And that's why it's Adam and Eve that's shown being pulled. There's this sense in which there is this kind of fractal participation, that as Christ is pulling up Adam and Eve, then Adam and Eve are pulling up their children, and et cetera, et cetera. And this beautiful image, of course, of the intercession of the saints and the intercession of us for each other, that we are really participating in each other's salvation. And, there are all these beautiful stories of saints that say something like, at the end of time, during the last judgment, if I see those that are judged, my desire will be to be with them, that there's this compassion for the lost that is participating in their salvation. I see that as a beautiful thing. So fire one ice does for $5 says, does AI complete Babel by creating a universal technological language ordered towards human power rather than communing with God? And so for sure, AI is a Babel machine. There's no doubt about that. I think that your insight is absolutely right. And what are you gonna do? It's like it seems to be the desire to kind of complete Babel and find, and not only find but use, weaponize the underlying structure of language that is below. And so, in some ways, a way to activate the divine language itself, right? AI is in some ways trying to find the language of Eden, right? And then to use it, to make money, basically, or to use it to enforce power. And so that's it. Like, that's exactly what it is. We are going to make a name for ourselves. We are going to have one language which will try to imitate or to or find once again the original language that was in the Garden of Eden. and technically that seems to be what it is they're trying to do, because once the structures that are under the LLMs, they are in some ways a common language that all languages express themselves in. And so, that's a very powerful thing that they found. But they're, sadly, they are going to use it to, make drone swarms and the like. What's interesting, if you're interested, you should pay attention. Ralston College, we did an event with Ralston. I did an event in the spring with Dr. Ian McGilchrist and also Stephen Wolfram, Stephen Wolfram's a mathematician who's been involved highly in kind of AI and talks about, let's say, the mathematical models that exist under the AI. And Wolfram, you can even watch the trailer. He says something like that, which is that we've discovered the language under the language, and the LLMs have discovered this kind of unifying language. And he sees it as very hopeful. Obviously, Dr. and McGilchrist sees it as rather kind of imitation, kind of left brain imitation. So, All right, so let's see here. I am working to be a screenwriter, and your work. So Colby Vlach for $4.99 says, I'm working. Also, I'm working to be a screenwriter, and your work and example have been greatly influential to me. Thank you. Well, you're welcome, Colby. Hopefully, hopefully these are the things that I care about. If we can get great storytellers and great artists, and if I am able to play any role in producing that, then that would be amazing. It's like people don't realize that in some ways the thing that I'm doing is a proto thing, and I'm not I do a lot of things, if you notice, right? So I'm obviously a visual artist, I'm a writer, I comment on meaning, I make meaning, I doing all these things. And so obviously I'm going to be mid. I'm going to be mid at everything that I do. I mean, not mid, and I don't want to self-deprecate myself, and that's not what I'm doing. What I mean is that I'm not going to create the best versions of all the things that I'm doing. I'm always going to create, in some ways, mitigated versions that are good, but that aren't like excellent. And so definitely what I hope to see is, I hope to see icon covers that are much better than I. And I hope to see storytellers that are way better than I am, and illustrators and all of that will kind of come out of what I do. And if that happens, then it will have justified my mid-tier, let's say, production, and give examples to others. And if I do that, then I'll die like a happy man, Anyways, kind of giving you too many of my inner secrets here. All right, so Johnny Robb asks, do you have anything to say about the symbolism of adoption? I don't hear it discussed a lot on your channel, but if you consider Jesus was like an adopted son to Joseph, then it's at the center of the Christian story. My wife has went through 2 miscarriages, and we're thinking of adopting. Perhaps there is some symbolism behind miscarriage that is redeemed by adoption. And so, the symbolism of adoption, obviously in Christianity, is used to talk about us, right? That we are in some ways not the we're not the begotten son, but we are the adopted sons of God, and that this capacity of the church, and that's what the church does, right? The church adopts in the sense that we have a way to make someone enter into the good, even though they were cut off before that. So in that sense, it's a beautiful symbolism. But, like all symbolism, it has 2 faces, right? It has several aspects to it. It has a positive aspect, and it also has a negative aspect. And I think that in some ways we have to be careful, because you can see now how adoption is in some ways becoming showing its negative aspect. You see that obviously with things like, for example, surrogacy becomes a kind of extension of adoption. And there's also the danger of, you could say, having the child that you wish you had had, and imposing that on the child. There's a reason why, adopted children often don't have great lives. Like it's not it doesn't mean that all that happens to all adopted children, but there's a reason why that's the case. Some early Christians actually opposed adoption because they saw it as a dangerous social behavior where the abandonment of children could be justified to some extent, by the fact that others were adopting them. So it's a complicated thing, and I would say that if you want to adopt, because one of the problems you see, like just practically, is that adoption has now also become a kind of market, right? It's actually you're buying children. To me, that's not the real spirit of adoption. People who buy children in order to adopt them, it's like a weird thing. I would tend to just be attentive to all of that. And if you adopt someone out of compassion, for example, I know some people who have taken, foster children, for example, whose families are broken or who are orphans or have all this difficulty, and then ultimately adopt those foster children. That's a true sacrifice. That's a true self-sacrifice. To adopt a foster child, that can be really a Christian gesture, because you never really will own that child. You'll always know that is in some ways a sacrifice that you made. But I think that's different from people who, buy children in Ukraine, like who fly to Ukraine and then pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to like buy children. To me, that's anyways, this is tricky stuff, guys. Like I want to be careful. I don't want to judge anybody. Everyone has their own kind of life story, but just be attentive to the double sides, let's say, of the symbolism of adoption. All right, so Iron Giant Man 007, $5 says, I realized it might be a bad thing that one of America's main icons is a flag of a rebellion emblazoned with a serpent declaring not to tread upon. Yeah, for sure. I've always said that the Gadsden flag, has something very much in common with the Pride flag, very much so. It's actually very close in terms of its symbolism, which is, this idea of, the individual's capacity for self-determination and the refusal of authority, right? The idea that authority is evil in itself, all of that, But yeah, what are you going to do? So think of name 490 for 499. It's a bit of an oddball question, but chess is becoming increasingly popular again. What is the symbolism of people's interest here? I mean, I think chess is the ultimate game. It's the ultimate game because it's pure skill, it's pure strategy. There's no chance. It's, I think that for that reason, it is the closest thing to like combat you can do, like kind of intellectual combat. So it's understandable that it will always kind of be popular and end up its popularity returning. And I think there's also probably a desire to have real life interactions, because obviously the gaming online, kind of gaming world is also very popular, but there will always be like a reaction to that, to like sit there with a board and actual chess pieces, and also, I mean, man, chess. I mean, the chess is one of those things that has become so beautiful. If you look at the how it has become stylized and how its elegance, right, in the pieces, and the checkered board with the opposite of black and white. I mean, it's like, who doesn't love a chessboard? I mean, I don't really like playing chess, but man, when I see a chessboard, you just feel compelled because it's such a such a cosmic image. It's so cosmic in its structure. I mean, everything about it, from the idea that the king, is almost like how can I say it? The king is impassible, right? The king doesn't really attack, that he's behind and he's kind of like this unmovable, this non-moving mover kind of thing. To all of the fact that all of these different strategies for different roles, it's just one of the most cosmic games humans have ever been able to come up with. I wish I liked it more, but I get impatient when I play chess. And also then I take too much time myself and then make other people impatient. I'm never really not good at it. All right, let's see. All right. Um, so here's some of the comments in the chat. What do you think about Christian YouTubers who are telling other Christians to not watch the Odyssey because of the casting? I mean, whatever. People can do what they want. I understand some people who want to just hold the line, but you have to make do with the world you're in. There's also, this is difficult sometimes for people to understand, is that you can't pretend you're not in a world. And once you're in a certain situation, then you have to make the decisions based on the reality in which you are. And in order to, let's say, you could say, emphasize the most good. So I'll give you an example. It's a very simple one. So for example, let's say I'm not that famous. Let's say I have a certain amount of reputation, and I'm able to engage with people, right, that are at a certain level of influence, and I'm able to talk to them. And let's say some Anon guy on X will say, why don't you tell them off? Why don't you tell them what's real? Tell them, be a witness for Christ. Tell them what's true. Tell them they're going to hell. Tell them that they're lost. Whatever. It's that type of attitude. It's not like that kind of behavior isn't sometimes justified. But you also have to realize that no one has to listen to you, right? No one has to hear what you have to say. And so take someone like Christopher Nolan. So Christopher Nolan has millions and millions of people that will look at what he's doing and be influenced by what he's doing. And so you could say, well, that's not worth it. What you really should have is purity. You should have the pure message, the pure truth that is pointed like a laser. And the truth is that, maybe, but it also means that you'll have 5 people that'll listen to you. And that's just how it is. So these are just the realities of the world. And so anyway, so I would say that ultimately the Christian people that are saying don't go watch the Odyssey because it's not pure enough, then that's fine. Don't go watch the Odyssey. You have better stories anyways. You have the story of Christ. So, maybe that's fine. Focus on that story. It is the best story. But I will rejoice that Nolan was able to make a movie that is making, kind of progressive type atheist cheer for the return of the father and the husband and the elevation of the son as the continuation of the hierarchy. I will cheer for that, even though I can see the types of trickiness and let's say compromises that he had to make in order to get there. So, but I get it. Purity is easy to defend. So Austin Purcell for $9.99 says, Hey, Jonathan, can you share some of your favorite moments since growing the symbolic world to what it is now? It's been a great influence in my life. Baptized on Pascha last year. Thank you. Well, glory to God, Austin. Austin Purcell. Thank glory to God that you've been baptized. I'm happy to hear that. One of my favorite moments since since growing the symbolic world to what it is now. It's been an amazing ride, guys. I mean, I never could have predicted everything that happened. Obviously, my life has always kind of been that way, uh, but I think that this particular season of my life has been a complete surprise, but also just an amazing opportunity to do things. I've mentioned this maybe before on the channel. I've often been somewhat lonely. I mean, not lonely in terms of like friend, like family, and I love my family, and I'm close to some people, but lonely in the sense of peers, right? I felt kind of like my brother and I felt alone. Like we are thinking about these things, and it's difficult to connect with people that have the same visions and the same interests, and are kind of moving in the same direction. And I think the most exciting thing for me in the past few years has been to kind of to find myself surrounded by astounding people that are just the kind of people you dreamt you could have known in your 20s, right? Martin Shaw, Deacon Seraphim. There's so many, obviously Jordan Peterson. I could just keep naming all these people. I don't want to make you think like these particular ones are the ones that came to mind, but to me that's just been amazing. And so if you look at the people that I'm working with, the artists that I'm working with, they're astounding. Heather Pollington, and several of the other artists that we're working with, they're just amazing. And there's more to come, folks. Like, it feels like so many of the things that I've dreamed that I could do, that I have this strange chance to do them. I dreamt my entire life of making an illuminated Bible, and I didn't even propose this project. Deacon Seraphim came to me and he said, we have people that will be interested in helping us put out an illuminated Bible, and I was like, what? I've been dreaming of that since I was like 25, so like for 25 years I've had this dream. And so it's been really wonderful. And I thank all you guys have made it possible. Let's be honest. You've through your support, through you just, kind of trusting in the project that we're doing, buying the books, getting involved in the classes, all of that has made this possible. And hopefully it's to the glory of God. That's what I hope. But I have to say that, I can be a little selfish and say, I hope it's to the glory of God, but man, I'm getting a lot from this, like in the sense that I'm getting so much joy from seeing the world change and seeing these stories come back on the horizon, and so yeah, it's been great. And I hope it's just the beginning. As we're starting a new press called Salea Press that will be publishing more religious works. And it's like, maybe we can publish a version of St. Ephrem the Syrian's Hymns on Paradise. It'll be illustrated, that'll be beautiful, that I could maybe even write a commentary on. It's like, oh my goodness, like I'm allowed to do that? Like, it's just great. So, yeah, so I would say in general, it's just so exciting. It's exciting, and and I really want to see more people kind of come along. I love to see talented people get attention. I love to see artists, kind of come up and appear on the scene. Writers, when I know I never met Malcolm Guite, but when I met him, I was like, this person is he's my co-traveler, and he's doing what we're doing, and he is right on the path next to us, and we kind of come right up to him, and we're like, my goodness, this book, this Grail retelling is powerful and beautiful. So yeah, it's a wonderful moment, guys. And I would say, dig in, and a lot of stuff. And I'm grateful that I'm happy to see that we're also able to offer people all the things that I wished I could have had in my 20s. Right. So the universal history stuff that we're doing, I mean, this is gold. Like this is gold that was so difficult to find for us, when we were looking for it. And so like to be able to say, hey guys, we have this treasure, like here's this treasure. So now you have the treasure, like take it, take it further, keep going. Anyways, all right, enough on that. I'm gonna cry. All right. And so Panayotis Shatsiatstasio, my goodness, for 20 euros, says, I study architecture. Your take on symbolism has inspired me to see and create structures through meaning. Your insights on art and the process of creation in general have helped me and many of my colleagues. Thank you. Well, I'm very grateful to hear that, because honestly, architecture is the most important art. If we can take that back, we've done a great thing. Better, more than movies, more than any of the entertainment, even the stories. Like if we can take architecture back, if we can get it, and city planning, then we've done a great good that will have repercussions, for a very long time. And so obviously it's difficult because there's such deconstruction that even if we have the architects now, the people are losing the skills to make the right buildings. Like they're losing the perspective to be able to understand the reason for the proportionality and all of these things that are in traditional buildings. But I do think that nonetheless that's the future, because these big glass and steel monsters, no one's going to care about them in 100 years. I might be wrong, but that's my take on that. All right, let's see here, guys. All right, so let's see. Matt, there's not a lot of questions in the symbolic world question this time. You guys, all the supporters, you have an opportunity to ask a question. I've asked, I've answered all the questions. Right. So Matt Bro W8 says, Jonathan, does Nolan have Odysseus go into exile for his slaughter of the suitors, or to honor his seamen? Can you explain this symbolism behind passing the kingdom to our sons? I really liked that part. Some people thought that it was a cop out, to have Odysseus basically go into exile. I kind of liked it also because of the fact that he kept saying that he's going to the land of the West, and that in some ways there's also this idea of now exploration, and also basically saying he's going to America. Like that's what it feels like he's saying. He's saying, I'm going to leave this to the next generation here, and I'm going out, to America. In Dante, interestingly enough, there's this whole tradition about how Odysseus, goes out past the Pillars of Hercules after he returns home. And it's interesting because Nolan takes that kind of tradition and flips it and makes it into something that is positive rather than something that is hubris, which is what is presented in Dante. It's like, oh, you have this hubris of going out into the unknown. But so I just thought it was an interesting play, an interesting tack, and I think that this is okay. Let me say something about Nolan's Odyssey that I think is important. Is Nolan isn't retelling you the poem. What Nolan is doing is saying, you know what, you should know the poem. You should know the Odyssey. And now what I'm doing is I'm doing what people have been doing since Homer, which is I'm going to tell you a version that will interpret Homer's Odyssey and will add to it and will kind of play with it and play with the different traditions. He's doing universal history is what he's doing. He's doing the kind of romances that we talked about in universal history, the Alexander romance, or all of these romances that existed in the Middle Ages, where an ancient story was retold in a way to comment on it, like a midrash type of approach, to interpret it, to comment on it, to make it relevant. And so I think that that's what Nolan is doing. And I think to me, it seems like it might just be opening the door to that, right? That's what we're doing with God's dog. That's what we're doing with the fairy tales, which is that the fairy tales, I'm telling them in a celebratory tone, but I'm not doing it in a way that is simply retelling it. I'm saying, you know what? You should know the story of Snow White. And now I'm going to tell it in a way that will make certain things shine, that will bring things out so that you can see it in a different light or in a clearer light. And so I think that that's what Nolan is doing. And so a lot of people are angry because what they want is simply him. It's like they want an educational experience. They want, oh, I'm not going to read the poem, so I'm going to watch the movie so that I know what's in the poem. But that's just, to me, that's just so thin. It's such a thin thing. And the medievals knew about everybody. The medievals knew what the poem was. And so they would tell versions that would be a comment, right? The Aeneid is not just a retelling of the Iliad or of the ancient stories. It is the Roman perspective and a kind of addition to that shines light in different ways on the story. And that's what the Greeks used to do all the time. So if you look at the Greek tragedies, everybody knew the myths. The Greek tragedians are not writing the myths. They are making them into a type of commentary. So all the Greek tragedies are doing what Nolan is doing in the Odyssey. That is, they are taking a myth that everybody knows, and they're willing to play with it because you know it. And the playing with it won't destroy or distort it. What it will do is it will simply make it bright and shine in different ways and become a vehicle for comments on fate or on Xenia or on all of the different things that the cultures care about. And so, I think that's probably one of the reasons why I like the Odyssey so much, is that it's not just a simple retelling, right? It is engaged in the way in which our stories are retold, are retold so that we can see them in different lights. And so, yeah. All right. So Maxwell Bliss says, do you think the way we use the word sacrifice is too ambiguous? In our culture, it seems to always have a positive meaning, which is not always true. It's interesting. I'm not sure that in our culture it always has a positive meaning. I think that we will say something, like imagine some guy leaves his wife for a stupid affair. You'll say, dude, you sacrificed your family for this girl, right? And so I don't think we see it as this notion of giving something up for something else, right? In some ways, giving away something or giving up something for another good, trading in that way. But I don't think that we see it only as positive. I've heard people use it very much in both senses. Maybe it's just me, but that's my sense, right? Northern Swordsman says, what is the symbolism of scrolling social media? I found myself feeling like just waking up after stopping. This has made me remember the icon of the bitten apple on the back of my phone. Yeah, for sure, man. Scrolling social media is deadly, right? Because it really is it really is in some ways, especially like the reels and all of that stuff, man, it's basically destroying your attention. It's in real time. It's just like moving from one meaningless thing to another. Because the thing is that these meaningless things, they don't have enough to sustain us, and we know it. So if we can just string them up, then we feel somewhat full, right? And so it's like if I could just eat a little bit of candy, a little bit, then I feel like I'm eating something, even though ultimately it's empty. And the more it's empty, the more you have to keep stringing these things up, so that you don't fall into the despair that happens once you stop, right? Once you kind of stop. So yeah, I agree. And we all do it. Obviously, I do it. Because I'm on social media, and so I have reason to go but I've become an X guy, really. And that's horrible. It's like the worst, you know. But I get the sense. I mean, maybe you guys can tell me what you think. But my sense is that there's like a weird generational thing with the social media. I was thinking about that this morning because I realized that I don't know how to use Instagram, you know. And I keep, because I talk to my team and something, they'll say, "Oh, can you post up something on Instagram to promote this or that thing, you know, to promote the event we're doing in Oxford?" Which, by the way, we're doing an event in Oxford, folks. I'm so excited about that. Anyways, let me finish this and I'll tell you about that. Um, and I don't know, like, I'm like, I don't know how any of this works, any of this Instagram stuff. And I realized that Facebook is really boomer. Like, Facebook is the boomer network, you know. And I think that X is the X network. I think that Elon Musk felt like there was no platform for Generation X, for his own generation. So he made the X platform as the platform for Generation X. Instagram is like mostly the millennial kind of platform, and probably also Gen Z to some extent. But for sure, TikTok at least was. I don't know if it still is, but definitely was like the Gen Z app. You know. Anyway, so I find that interesting. I might be wrong, but anyways, I forgot to tell you. So I'm really excited about the and I can tell you guys here. Wouldn't say it out in public, but we're doing this event in Oxford, 24th to 26th of September. It's very limited. We have only 150 places, and Dr. Martin Shaw is going to be there. I'm going to be there. Deacon Seraphim, Father Andrew Damick, Aiden Hart, and other speakers are going to be there. There also are going to be great people there. Paul Kingsnorth is going to come, and Mary Harrington is going to come. And there's going to be some people, you know, there's going to be very influential people also that are going to be there. So it's going to be amazing. And we're actually kind of struggling to sell tickets, and I get it because, you know, Oxford, it's a little difficult. We're trying to find also options for people to find cheaper lodging at the event. But man, this is going to be the Symbolic World event of the year for sure, because of just how intimate it's going to be. We want to do like a pub crawl. We want to do like a kind of these C.S. Lewis visits with like C.S. Lewis type stuff. It's going to be absolutely amazing. So if you guys can swing it, I would love to see you there. It's really going to be like a party, because we're only going to be 100 something people. And several of those people are going to be people you've seen on the channel. So, yeah. All right. So Brad Jack 08247 $5 US says, would a distorted and disfigured cinematic version of the Bible shine a beautiful spotlight on it the way it does for the Odyssey? I don't think so. I don't know what you mean. I mean, I guess you're suggesting that the Odyssey is a disfigured cinematic version. I don't think it is. I don't think the Odyssey is a disfigured cinematic version. But I do think that, you know, when I wrote my brother and I, when we wrote God's Dog, and we actually proposed it as a movie, right? And what the Odyssey is doing is what we hope to do, I think, with God's Dog. And maybe that's tainting my interpretation. Some people might, you know, suggesting that maybe because I really want to see a story like that, which was the idea that it would be possible to do a double inversion, which is to present something that at the outset looks subversive, but is ultimately bringing about the meaningful structure. And I think you could do that with the Bible. I think you could. I think you could make movies or versions of the Bible stories that would attract the kind of atheist or all of that, but then in it have a kind of turn where ultimately the beauty of the story would appear. For sure, I think someone could do that, but yeah. But it might not be me. I'm not very good at keeping secrets, so, you know, you need someone who would be able to keep a secret. For sure, Christopher Nolan's able to keep a secret, you know, and so I think that's why I think he might be doing that. So Alex Foster 488. $5. Forgive me if you already answered, but what is significance of your Batman statue behind you? Do you just enjoy Batman, favorite version. The reason why, and I'm really bad at this. I'm very disciplined. What I want to do is I want to use the Batman statue to signify when I'm talking more about kind of pop culture, and then put the icons in the center when I'm talking more about kind of religious subjects. But knowing me, I'll just forget and I just won't change it properly. But hopefully, just saying it now will help me remember to do it. The Virgin statue is the Batman animated Virgin, which I really liked, which came out when I was a teenager, and I thought was a very streamlined, kind of beautiful version of the Batman story. I've always liked Batman since I was 10 years old. I don't know why. I mean, I kind of know why. I think Batman is an image of the gargoyle. You're right. He's an image in some ways of you could say fear and dark things turned kind of used in the service of good, which is everything we've been talking about now with the Odyssey and the idea of God's dog, or this idea of the kind of double inversion. So that's kind of why I like Batman. But also, just as a young person, I think that there are several Batman stories that really hit me. Reading Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns when I was like 13 years old, man, that was a shock, right? It was like, oh, this is what comic books can be. And then it made me just really love. And I was at the time when all of these amazing books were being published, obviously Watchmen by Alan Moore, but also there were a lot of very subtle American comics that were being made. And so it's one of the things that made me kind of fall in love with comic books. When I was 15, we moved houses, and there was a lot of stuff going on in my family. We had moved a lot. And so my family said, look, my mother said, we're moving again, but if you want, I'll let you paint your room with whatever you want to do. And so on my wall next to my bed, I had this huge version of Batman that I had done actually in pastel, so that it was like this kind of fuzzy, kind of dark figure. Anyways, so yeah, I've liked Batman for a very long time, and I still do. Once in a while I'll get because I stopped reading comics, in my early 20s, and I didn't really read any comics until maybe I started writing God's Dog and wanted to think about comics again when we started making it into a graphic novel. So once in a while I still get some of the Batman stories that I haven't read because I was just too old, and I kind of enjoy them. It's like a little guilty pleasure. Anyways, enough about Batman. All right. So in the filth, $5 US asks, if you make a mistake when carving or painting an icon that is incorrectable, what do you do with it? Is there a normative way of discarding icons? And so obviously, the thing about painting an icon is that you just scrape it and you can do it again. Like, you can't really if you're doing a traditional icon on a wooden panel, you can't make a mistake that you can't fix. You just have to scrape the paint off, and then you can paint it again. But if you're doing a carving, for sure, there you can, if you're making a carving, make mistakes that you can't fix, and so sometimes you can end up with a pretty horrible icon. It doesn't mean you have to destroy it. I mean, there are plenty of ugly icons that exist in the world that, you can give it to someone if they can tolerate, whatever it is, as long as it's not something that makes it heretical. Like, I don't know what mistake you could make that would make it heretical. But I would say, if you want to know what the normative way of discarding icons is, especially painted icons, is to burn them. And this is, in theory, this is also true even of printed icons, which no one really does. But in theory, and I've tried to do it, because people give you these printed icons. Sometimes it's almost like it's a curse, because it's like, I didn't ask for a little icon of Saint so and so, and so now I have this icon, and I'm not sure what to do with it, because I know I'm not going to put it up. I'm going to put it in a drawer maybe, but at some point, if you want to get rid of it, usually you're supposed to burn it. That's the way you get rid of sacred things in general. What are you going to do? But we have so many of these printed icons now, it's almost impossible to do that. All right, so Loving Home 1 for $5 US says, how to navigate converting away from the religion of your fathers if the deepest stories are those of the prodigal son or return to the king motif. who is navigating away from the religion of your fathers? I mean, it depends how you perceive it. If you mean something like becoming Orthodox, let's say, which obviously is my case, then I'm definitely returning to the religion of my fathers. I mean, it's been a long loop. Maybe there's 10 generations before the return, but I'm definitely returning to the religion of my fathers. And I do feel like I'm gaining the return of the king after a long, progressive exile. Doesn't mean there's nothing, obviously, in Catholicism and Protestantism. There's plenty there, and there's beauty and there's power in those things. But I do, at least in my case, believe that my conversion to Orthodoxy is a prodigal son return, across the generation. So, yeah. Holographic Sweater says, I found God's dog at my thrift store I go to. I was like, no way. That's cool. That's hilarious. That'd be nice. Yeah, we need God's dog to fill up all the thrift stores. We're gonna publish the new version. The next book of God's dog is coming out in the fall, and it's really great. Man, I'm so excited about the next books of God's dog. The artist we're working with now, Chris Weaver, he's a professional storyboard artist, and he's just doing an amazing job. And now the third book is coming out in the fall. We're past halfway through the fourth book in terms of the drawings and even the coloring. And it just keeps getting better and better. His art just keeps getting better and better. It's like he fell in love with the story. And now, the fourth book is, and now's the time when we get to a lot of more action and more fighting and more kind of crazy scenes. And so, yeah, I'm really excited. I hope you guys, get it because we have the whole epic kind of done. So I'm excited about that. All right, so I think I'm gonna answer one last question, and I'm gonna check out, guys. So Kyle Billings 3587 for $5 US says, what might the pre-Adamic intergalactic community have done when the prophecy of the incarnation spread across the universe? An Old Testament prequel. The pre-Adamic intergalactic community have done when the prophecy of the incarnation spread across the universe. I have no idea what it is that you are. I don't even know what this means. Pre-Adamic intergalactic community. All right. I'm sorry, Kyle. I can't answer that question because I struggle to understand what it is you're talking about. All right, guys. It was good to talk to you guys. I hope you are having a wonderful summer, and I hope I'll see some of you in Oxford in September. If not, hopefully I'll see you next month during the Q&A. So thanks, guys. It was good to see you. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.